We know now from mental health and physical health research, the relationships you build is the biggest factor in your mental and physical health.
Why do you think people become so obsessed with this idea of chemistry?
Humans don't like things that aren't predictable, and they try to make rules to make it easier. If after 20 minutes I don't have chemistry, then I'm not going to waste my time because there's 10 other people over here who might be the one. What we've forgotten is there are no rules, we're all highly individual, and relationships are supposed to be costly. And that means you are supposed to sit there and have several dates. Because as far as evolution is concerned, this is the most important thing you're going to do today.
Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this.
Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. I'm a men's dating, relationship, and intimacy coach. I really help men who are struggling in the patterns that keep them single or put them in relationships and relationship states that they are unhappy with or that are harmful to what they are desiring, and help them really find love and connection and authenticity as well. And in today's episode, I'm joined for a wonderful, wonderful guest, Dr. Anna Machin. We get into love. We talk about love. We talk about the science of love, and she has so much to say about it. She's been researching love for over 20 years. I was lucky enough to be on a panel with her, and she's incredible. She's an evolutionary anthropologist, a writer, broadcaster. You know, she's known across the world talking about humans and close relationships. She's authored 2 books, The Life of Dad and, Why We Love. So she's, probably one of the world's experts on love, in this episode. And really ask her a lot of questions, and we get into a lot of the aspects of love. Romantic love, because I know that's what a lot of us are interested, but we actually talk about the different types of love, and why they're important, and why all types of love are equal and important. And that becomes really important towards the end of the episode when we talk about AI love. And, this is AI going to replace people? Are men going to just choose robots instead of women? We explore that a little bit as well. We talk about things like, the different stages of love, romantic love, attraction, and then really falling deep into love, and the science behind it, the neurochemistry and so forth. We talk about the fear of breakups, the fear of rejection, and why breakups affect some people more than others as well. We talk about toxic relationships and why people stay in them. Very important. Really good listen, that piece as well. And we also talk a lot about dating apps, right? Dating apps and attraction, and why dating apps are bad, and why we need to use them differently, and how you should be using dating apps as well. And it also gives a really good hack for having really good first dates, for having literally the perfect neurochemical first date, of what you can do, the step-by-step guide, a little hack for you there. And then we talk about mate value. That's an interesting piece of the episode as well. But then we finish up talking about something that's really kind of important to me at this point in my life, which is fatherhood, and why fatherhood is so important in the beginning years of a child's life, and also the child rearing, and then the research that she's done around that. We touched on that for probably about 15, 20 minutes, and I'd love to get back to talk a bit deeply about that, because I think is really important to understand that, because, I talk a little about my experiences going through, being pregnant, not myself, also obviously, about that. But we talk about fatherhood, and this is one of those episodes you're going to sit and you're going to be like, man, I need to send this to somebody. So if you do listen to it and you want to send it to someone, please do. It'd be really grateful, not just for me, but for the person who's receiving it. And also, if you enjoy this episode, feel free to go onto Apple or Spotify, wherever you review your episodes, and give me a little review. You know, it's not for any sort of dopamine hit reason. It's more that the more reviews it has, the more ratings it has, the more people find the podcast, and people get to hear about wonderful and amazing people like Anna as well. But I've gone on far too long. I'll let you jump into the episode. Welcome back, listeners. Welcome back to another episode. I'm adjusting my microphone to see if it's in the right place. It seems to be. But welcome back to another episode. And I have a wonderful, wonderful guest for me today. Someone who I had the privilege of sitting on a panel talk and was really blown away by her incredible knowledge and also such a wonderfully succinct delivery of knowledge, because I was really in awe of that. I was like, wow, man, I wish I could know all those things and then just say them so easily for people to digest. So I thought someone I definitely have to get on the podcast to talk to. So today we have with us Dr. Anna Machin. How are you doing, Anna?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
No, my pleasure, my pleasure. We were at a panel talk at the Conduit probably about 2 months ago, maybe. God, time does fly.
Yeah, I think it was a Valentine's Day thing, wasn't it?
Yeah,
which is quite a busy time of year for me.
Imagine for the woman who is an expert in love. I wonder, actually, how did you come to find this as your place of I know you do some stuff around fathers, but what was the journey to be like, oh, I'm going to go deep into love?
I kind of fell into it, really. I came to Oxford after doing my PhD, and my PhD was on the evolution of social and sexual behaviour. And then I went to Oxford University to work with someone called Professor Robin Dunbar, who's a specialist in social behaviour and social neuroscience. And my job within his group was to study the really close human relationships. So what in science we call dyadic relationships, so couple relationships. But it wasn't just to do romantic love. It was to do all the loves that humans experience. And so, as everyone does, I did start with the romantic love, and also started with friendship. And then over time, I had my own child. And after seeing what my husband went through as a new father, and as sort of a co-parent, I then started studying the father-child relationship. And then I just expanded it to really all the other sorts of love we have. So looking at sort of platonic love, looking at love between humans and God, whatever your God might be, looking at sort of what we call parasocial love, which is love for celebrity or a character in a book, and also looking at the future of love. So what's love, how's that going to change as we go forward, particularly with the introduction of new technologies. So I really did kind of fall into it, which happens to a lot of academics, because it's not very easy to predict where you're going to end up, what jobs are going to be advertised. So, but I am really passionate about it. I love understanding all the different ways that we can love and all the different ways we can sort of create really intense relationships with each other and with other animals and other beings, really. Wow.
Yeah. And you said all the type of ways that we love. And I imagine as human beings, we have a lot of different ways that we do love.
Yeah, we're very lucky compared to other animals. I mean, there are some other animals that have sort of loose friendship type love. And obviously they have a parent-child love, sometimes a father-child love, depending on the species. And sometimes you can't really call it a romantic love, but a love that sort of keeps reproductive partners together for a bit of time while they raise their children. So they have, but we are the ones who've really expanded it into these massive social networks. So you can love within your community, for example. You can have a love of a community. So on average, we have 150 individuals in our social network, and that's much, much more than any other species. And we've managed to build it even into these loves that we kind of have in our imagination. Not that they're not real to people, but like religious love and parasocial love, quite often you're in love with somebody who you will never physically meet. And that's amazing, because that means it all happens in your head without the physical touch and all that kind of thing that usually bonds love relationships. So that's the really exciting bit, I think, for humans, is that we've managed to do it without even having the normal bonding behaviors that you would have to create a bond. So yeah, for me, that's a really exciting bit. So yeah, we are so lucky. And that's what I say to people, is that we kind of have an obsession with romantic love, but actually all the loves are equal. You don't get more from romantic love than you do from any other love, actually, in terms of benefits. And so what I like to say to people is actually, as a human, you just need to identify some sources of love in your life. And that can be love for your community. You love volunteering in your community and you have really intense bonds with people in that community. Or it could be with your dog or your cat or with a god or whatever. Just as long as you have love in your life, it doesn't really matter who it's with.
As long as it's meaningful to you.
Yeah, exactly.
So why did we evolve as human beings to love? What was the kind of, I know there's some obvious purposes of it, but I imagine there's some more nuanced and interesting parts of why we evolved to be such loving beings.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's sort of an evolutionary story. So the main reason we evolved to have love in the very, very first instance, which would have been several million years ago, was really for a very kind of cold, hard reason, really. Humans have to cooperate with each other to survive. That we're not actually a very good species at being solitary, because there's lots of things we need to learn from each other. We are, if you're a parent, you know how incredibly difficult it is to raise human babies. So quite often there's lots of people involved in raising a human baby, that kind of thing. And even things like in the environment in which we evolved, we needed to cooperate to hunt, and we needed to cooperate to find food and build shelter and find water. And so we had to do this thing where we had to cooperate and get on with each other. But cooperation is really hard, actually, because while some people are really easy to get along with, a lot of people are really difficult to get along with, but you still need them in your life. And so love actually evolved as a form of biological bribery. So it was just a set of neurochemicals which kind of motivate you and then reward you and then addict you for doing this really, really difficult thing, which is actually having to get along with other people. So at the most basic level, that's how it started. But obviously over time, it's become much more complicated than that, because humans aren't just biological creatures, we're also cultural creatures. And so we've built up a lot of culture around love. And even at the biological level, it's not just a set of neurochemicals, but it's but so we've added all these layers of meaning and importance and ritual and rules and all this sort of thing on top of love. So love today, when we say to people, what do you think love is? There isn't actually just a single answer to that question. There's lots of answers to that question, and it's quite a personal thing. But in the very, very first moments of love, I'm afraid it was just a bribery thing to say, right, we really need you to do these relationships because otherwise the species will die out. So we're going to, make you do these relationships by giving you these lovely chemicals that will make you feel really nice and make you feel more open to talking to each other and more open to sticking around each other. And that's essentially all the neurochemistry does today is the same thing. It hasn't changed, but we've got all these layers of complexity on top of it now.
So there's this like very basic chemistry part that is occurring for all of us. And then there is, what humans are really great at is creating story and meaning and layers and story and meaning and mythology and narrative. And that kind of cemented in like love as such an important part of us as we added in those layers.
Absolutely. I mean, love is really fascinating because actually, when we love, even though we've got that neurochemistry, actually every single mechanism in your body is engaged when you're in love. So not just your neurochemistry, but what we call your physiology. So blood pressure, heart rate, all those sorts of things. I mean, we all know when we meet someone we really fancy or we haven't seen for a long time, when we love them, your heart races and get a bit sweaty. And so your physiology is involved, your psychology is involved, everything's involved. Your genetics underpin some of your behavior when you're in love. And then, then we've got this cultural bit as well. And if you just think about your day, even though you're not sort of actively probably loving all the time, you're constantly cooperating with people. You're constantly maybe even in the abstract thinking about your loved ones or planning something with your loved ones or sorting something with your loved ones or buying something because one of your loved ones wants it. And so actually love is in every single moment of your day. And just the rules around love are, and the fact that we spend so much time obsessing about other people's relationships. I mean, if you're one of these people who spends all their time on Instagram looking at other people's relationships and what people do in their home, we're obsessed with other people's love as well. So, it is an all-consuming thing. I think, though, sometimes we don't think of it that way. But actually, if you go back through your day, you think, oh, actually, I cooperated with somebody then. I thought about my loved one then. I planned something I worried about my loved one. I went to the shop and bought my loved one's favourite cereal. Whatever it might be, you're always, always doing something around love.
Wow. So and I'm trying to think, there's a song and for some reason, who made this, like, love is really just everything.
It is really, and that's what I kind of put at the end of my book, is that, the question is the answer to the question, what is love, in one sense, is that it's actually everything. It's actually it is the most important thing. We know now from health research, from mental health and physical health research, that love and the relationships you build, whatever form of relationship they are, is the biggest factor in your mental and physical health and in your survival. So, actually it is everything, because if you don't have any love in your life of any sort at all, it is majorly detrimental. I mean, the more we hear a lot about loneliness. We hear a lot about sectors of society not having anyone to care for them. We hear, all these stories. And it's true, we are a highly social animal. And if we don't have that connection with other people, we suffer, essentially. So actually, love is everything. When you strip everything else away, that's it. That's the fundamental point, really.
Wow. And it's like, sounds so spiritual and philosophical to be like, love is everything. But actually, as you're saying, when we layer it down, it kind of it's bi-directional, like at this really basic level of human existence and society and how we've built the world that we've built.
Absolutely.
Without love, none of it would have been possible.
Without love, our species would have died out, essentially. It just would have gone. It wouldn't exist. So, it is absolutely fundamental to the fact that we're still here.
And you touched on the drugs that occur, the naturally occurring internal drugs that occur when we fall in love. And it was once I read somewhere, and I can't think exactly where I read this. It's like when we fall in love, we basically are high on drugs. And as you also use the word addicted as well.
Yes.
What are those drugs that are kind of at play?
Yeah. Well, it depends which stage of love you're at, really. So in the sort of attraction stage of love, there's 3 chemicals involved: oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin. And they all do slightly different things. So oxytocin, we say it lowers your inhibitions to starting new relationships. So what it does is it quietens the fear center of your brain. And that's kind of the bit that is switched on. When you think, I fancy that person, I want to walk across the bar and I want to talk to them, but actually I'm really, really nervous, and I'm really nervous they'll reject me, and all these sorts of things. What oxytocin does, it quietens the amygdala. So it makes that voice much smaller and much less effective. It makes you more relaxed. It's quite a chilling drug. And so that's what oxytocin does. And then dopamine is a reward chemical. So when you do anything you like, actually, you get a hit of dopamine. But when you see someone you're attracted to, you also get a hit of dopamine. So it's rewarding you for you're about to do this really hard thing. So it's going to make you feel really nice. So dopamine makes you feel really nice, and it's very enjoyable chemical. And it also is your hormone of motivation. So it motivates you to also do this difficult thing. Because if you just had oxytocin, whilst it would help you feel more confident about talking to the person, you might be so chilled that you actually can't be bothered to make the effort because you're having a lovely time on your own. So dopamine kind of gives you that kick and goes, no, you've actually got to go and make an effort now. And then serotonin is interesting because when you see someone you're attracted to, oxytocin and dopamine go up, but serotonin goes down, which is interesting because obviously it's your happy chemical. And that was a bit confusing for a while. But what we think is going on is that low levels of serotonin underpin obsessive compulsive behaviors. And so we think serotonin is involved in the obsessive elements of love. So although we don't want extreme obsession, which is basically stalking and inappropriate behavior, everyone has to be vaguely obsessed with the person you're in love with, because otherwise you wouldn't bother to plan anything with them. You wouldn't bother how they were feeling. You wouldn't bother to coordinate your day. All too much hassle. So the fact that we become a little bit obsessed, particularly in those early months, is really important because it makes sure that we focus really strongly on the new relationship and we really embed the relationship into our psyche. So that's the reason why when you're first in love with anyone, whoever it might be, you kind of look at their photos endlessly, or you daydream about them endlessly, or you bore all your friends senseless about them because you've got this chemical going, be obsessed, be obsessed, be obsessed. I mean, obviously it wears off after a bit, but it's really important. And that's the first stage of attraction, which actually isn't love. So there's no such thing as love at first sight when people go on about that. But love is underpinned by a different chemical, and that's beta endorphin. And beta endorphin is your body's opiate. It evolved as your body's painkiller. So it's just like morphine, basically. but over time it's evolved to also underpin human love. And it's an opiate, it's addictive, it works like all other opiates do. When you interact with someone you love, particularly if you use touch or, you do things together like sing or dance or any of these things that release opiates, you get this beautiful opiate high, this euphoria, this calmness, this amazing feeling of warmth. And then if you go away from the person, obviously you withdraw from the opiate, and that's not a very nice experience. It's a bit like going cold turkey off heroin. And so you're drawn back to the person. And it's a really simple mechanism. But beta endorphin is important because it's addictive, and therefore it never wears off its effect. It's permanently addictive. Whereas oxytocin, you can actually get less and less of an effect from. So it's not very good at underpinning really long-term relationships like the ones we have. It's fine if you're a mouse, which is where we discovered it worked. But if you're a human, it's not so hot. So it kind of disappears into the background, and beta endorphin comes to the fore. It will underpin a relationship for decades. And it's also released in every single type of human relationship. While oxytocin is mainly released in parent-child relationships or romantic relationships, so it's not so great at underpinning platonic relationships or relationships with your other members of your family. Beta endorphin is released in all relationships, and therefore it's really good at underpinning all the different types of love that we have in our lives, basically.
Wow, I've got so many questions now. I'm like, because I'm thinking of, actually the first thing I'm thinking of is like people who struggle to kind of do that first attraction part. For your studies, have you noticed that, is it difficult for some people to, say, for instance, generate enough dopamine to take the action? Do they feel, maybe people are scared of rejection, for instance. Right? Does their dopamine just never get above enough of a level to make them take the action? Or is it that people with, say, if their serotonin is too high, they're like, my life is good. I don't need nobody. I'm just here in my field enjoying my life.
Yeah, do you know what? Yeah, in a way. So there's a really big individual variation in how we behave when we're in love, how we experience relationships, how likely we are to start relationships, how likely we are to stick in relationships, all that kind of thing. And sometimes it is to do with neurochemistry. So, for example, with your serotonin example, absolutely. So there is a gene that influences whether or not you're single. It's not terribly powerful, but it is linked to serotonin. And what we think in those people who tend to be single and actually not that be fussed and want to be not bothered about being single at all, they tend to have, we think, very high circulating serotonin. So they just aren't bothered. They're just not that interested. They don't feel the need. They're not that obsessed, basically. They're just not obsessed enough to stick at a relationship. So there's those sorts of reasons. Genetics, as I say, underpin some of the variation. So sometimes it might be that you just don't have much circulating oxytocin and dopamine. You just don't have a lot. And therefore, you find it hard to start relationships. Sometimes it's psychological. So, as you say, you might have a fear of rejection. Certain people who carry a particular gene related to the endorphins are much more likely, for example, to suffer really powerful feelings of social rejection. So if you've got that gene, you find being dumped much harder than anyone else, and that might lead you to avoid relationships. And then obviously you've got things like attachment style that will affect whether or not you want to jump into a relationship, whether or not you're the type to start it and then run away, or whether you're the type to avoid it always, or whether you're the type to have a relationship but be really, really anxious the entire time you're in it. So there's lots of things that feed into why we all vary and why some of us are in long-term relationships, some of us aren't. It's really complex why people differ. But yeah, there's genetics, there's levels of neurochemistry, there's brain structure affects it, the psychology affects it. So that's why we all differ. There's usually some reason why somebody would struggle.
Wow. It's just like layers on layers, because it's so easy for, I've definitely put myself in the bucket of someone who has definitely been avoidant and probably is nonetheless. And I would have easily said maybe 15 years ago, if I had this conversation with you, I'd be like, relationship, I'm not really built for relationships. I would have really said that to you. And you know, if you'd given me some like, oh, it could be genetic, I'd go, well, my dad is single, my mum is single, and my grandma is single, so that must be the case. But in fact, as you said, it's a lot more complex than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And because there's a really complicated genetic and environment interaction. So genetics and psychology interact really in a really complex way. It's never going to be, I've got this gene, therefore I'm just going to end up like that. It doesn't work like that. It depends very much on your upbringing. It depends on your psychological state, and they all interact to sort of make you. So yeah, when people say to me, oh, I think I've got that gene, you're kind of like, well, you might do, but also it might just be 10 other reasons why, you know, you are the way you are. It's not straightforward.
Got it. And it's interesting that there's these opiates. I think it's hilarious that we, you know, because we always think of opiates, we think of heroin, and we think of like, you know, the opiate epidemic in the States. And you think that we have this drug running that can be naturally produced in so many different ways to make us addicted to things and to people and to experiences. Like, it really kind of blows my mind. I was, my partner's pregnant, so we currently just did some antenatal classes, and, you know, endorphins, that was it. We were talking about endorphins, and we're like, you know, to get the endorphins going during labor, and you were like, okay, so we get high on opiates. That's good for us because that gets us through the pain and gets us high.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, no, your partner will be full of endorphins. Partly because it's so painful, but she will be. She'll also be full of a lot of oxytocin and dopamine. So yeah.
And is there anything we can do if we? No, that's too simple. I was going to say, is there anything we can do if we want to be more active in that attraction phase? Because, you know, a lot of men come to me, they want to be more active in this attraction phase. They are struggling with the rejection, or, you know, they don't get themselves into action. Is there anything, obviously there's something we can do. What can we do to kind of make the reward bigger for ourselves?
There's kind of several things that science could tell you to do. I don't know whether the men you speak to spend a lot of time, for example, messaging before they meet people they go on dates with. That is not a very good idea from a scientific point of view, because if you simply message someone on a dating app or whatever, you get none of the help from the neurochemistry. No neurochemistry is released, and this neurochemistry has evolved to help you. So you're not getting the oxytocin to make you more confident. You're not getting the dopamine to motivate you. And you're not getting the serotonin to help you become more obsessed with this person. So you're actually handicapping your brain. And so I always say to people, in the first place, if you find you spend a lot of time messaging before you meet somebody, try and stop. Because it's just, there's several reasons for that. You're not getting the help. You're not getting the help from it. You actually can't assess whether you're truly attracted to the person, because attraction is measured by your brain through your senses. So you're taking a lot of sensory information when you first meet somebody. And again, you don't get anything from a WhatsApp message. There's literally nothing sensory in there at all. So again, you're talking to someone you don't even know if you're attracted to them. And I just think that also we tend to build fantasies about the person we're talking to if we talk to them for too long. And, you know, you might decide you'll build up a picture of what they look like in your head and who they are and how funny they are. And then you'll meet them. And quite a lot of the time, it'll be a crushing disappointment. But that's partly not their fault. It's because you've had this amazing conversation where you've decided who they are. It's like when you read a book and you build a whole world in your head about what the character looks like and and you've done that to a person. So I think there's several things So first of all, stop messaging if you can avoid it. Try and give yourself a rule, like I'm actually going to, so I'm just going to plug my Mac in. It's just about to die on me. I will come back to that question in 1 second. So, hold on a sec. There we go. My ring light has just disappeared, so I'm now going to look really grumpy. So stop doing that. The other thing I would say is use your knowledge about neurochemistry to help you on first dates. It's quite helpful to know the sorts of behaviors and the sorts of things you can do to generate that neurochemistry. So increase your levels of it. And there are some things that you can do to do that. So, particularly things, oxytocin and beta endorphin are released by touch. So if it's appropriate, touching somebody is okay. The other thing is humans get a really ramped up effect of beta endorphin if they do things in synchrony. And it doesn't necessarily mean you copy each other, but you know that give and take of a good conversation? That's what we would call synchrony. It's very, very natural. So what we say to people is make sure there's a good flow of conversation. Don't talk about yourself all the time, because that's not reciprocity. That's just you talking about yourself. You're not getting that hit of beta endorphin if you do that. And make sure you make sure the other person allows you to say something. So make sure you are vocal, equally vocal. Eye gaze is really important. And I know it's difficult for some people. We're not talking about staring into someone's eyes and intimidate them, but eye gaze is another really good releaser of oxytocin. There's something about eye gaze. We see it in parents with babies, even when they're pre-verbal. That is, if you can give a nice, appropriate eye gaze to somebody, that really increases oxytocin. Try and do something. There are several behaviors that release beta endorphin, which will help you, addict you to the other person, hopefully addict them to you. Laughter, okay? Dancing and singing. Exercise. So if you're a bit of an exercise junkie, maybe one of your dates, you could go to the gym together, go for a run together, all these sorts of things. That releases beta endorphin. And if you do a beta endorphin releasing activity with somebody else, it multiplies the effect of the beta endorphin. So you can go for a run on your own, and let's say you'll get 5 units of beta endorphin from the run, because exercise releases endorphins. You go for a run with someone else, you'll get 30 units of beta endorphin, because you've not only got the exercise, but you've also got the social element. So I kind of joke, and it is a joke, but take the science from it, that the ideal first date is some form of couples dancing, whether it be salsa, ballroom, whatever it might be, and a hot curry. And the reason for that is ballroom dancing is the perfect first date behavior, because you're touching each other, hopefully appropriately. You are laughing because you're not very good at it. You are doing something in synchrony, which will ramp it up. You're doing exercise, releases beta endorphin. And you might stand on each other's feet, which releases beta endorphin because it's a painkiller. Then you go for a curry because there are a lot of beta endorphin receptors in your gut. Your gut is your second brain. And curries irritate the gut. And because it's got irritated, it releases beta endorphin because it's trying to calm itself down, basically. It's trying to release the pain that's occurred from being inflamed. And so all of these things together mean that you are much more likely to look attractive to the other person, and you are much more likely to find the other person attractive. So that's kind of like a science hack, but you kind of have to remember that your brain is your friend in all this. Unfortunately, dating apps, whilst they do have benefits, they also handicap your brain quite a lot. So you have to release your brain. There's millions of years of evolution have gone into actually making you quite good at this, actually. But you have to let your brain do its thing, essentially.
Wow. I feel like at some point, maybe Anna, you could write a whole book about the kind of how to hack your dating life with science.
Yeah,
and I can imagine maybe armies of people who would want this book. Oh wow. And it's interesting you say laughter, right? Because isn't that one of the most common things that's trait that people want in a partner? Like, when it's not so much, even on dating apps, it's one of the things that's most requested, and particularly by women, if I remember rightly, like this desire for someone who is humorous. And why I connect back to this is I was back to my antenatal classes again, because they feel like they've ruled my life for the last 2 weeks. But one of the questions that the woman that ran the class asked us at the end was to look at our partner and say, what is it about our partner that we'd like our children to inherit from us, which I thought was a really beautiful
That's
practice.
Lovely, actually, yeah.
And every single one of the women said to their partners who are men that they wanted them to inherit their humor and playfulness, those two things, either or, but both of them. And at the end of it, me and my partner also were like, really, we got in the car and we were driving, and I said, it was really, because we're both relationship coaches, so we can't help but analyze everybody in their relationships. so we were like, I said to her, I was like, all the men in that room had their own very unique way of being funny and humorous, right? But they all were funny and humorous in their way. Even if I didn't find it funny, I could laugh and smile and see why their partners loved it. But the thing but every single woman said this, and we also noticed it more than I did. And I was like, wow, that is really striking as a thing that's like every single one, the humor was such an important aspect of what they wanted their children to
Yeah.
inherit. And, you know, as you said here, humor, and, you know, we keep seeing the science backs it up from what you say, but then the reality of, you know, dating apps and what people are looking for also backs it up as well, that this humor, this laughter, this belly laugh that we desire to feel, a lightness, a playfulness, is so important for our dating lives, our love, our connection in every way.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots. Sense of humor also shows huge, what we call cognitive flexibility and creativity. So you have to have quite a good creative brain to be funny, and you have to understand other people very well to be funny, because you have to understand what they will find funny, if you see what I mean. So you have to have quite what we call a good mentalizing skill to be funny. So actually what you're attracted to as well is the endorphins from the laughter, but also this person's actually got a really good brain. They're really creative. They're really good at mentalizing. They're good at judging social states and emotional states, you know, appropriate humor. And therefore, you know, in the back of your unconscious mind, you're thinking, I want my kid to have that. And therefore that's attractive. It's very, very attractive to inherit that kind of brain. And what I really love, actually, is sense of humor is important. But when you do research of like people who are looking for long-term relationships, and you say, just list for me what the traits you would, you know, ideally like in your partner. Sense of humor definitely up there. But the other thing that's up there, which I think is really nice, is kindness. I just want them to be kind. And I think, you know, that playfulness, that sense of humor, there's, you know, generally comes along with a kindness, somebody who is going to be there for you, basically. And I think that's always comes out as actually one of the top things both men and women want. Beyond everything else is I just want someone who's kind.
I've always felt that humor, as you kind of said, it alludes to a great capacity for social and emotional intelligence, because for me to have humor in the moment, I need to read my environment, like the space I'm in, the person I'm with, their emotional state, my own emotional state, and be able to then come up with and say, it can be the tiniest thing, right? Or it could be the biggest thing, but to read all of those quite unconsciously or consciously for some people, and then be able to deliver something that is humorous. It's a lot of cognitive power to do that. And it also is like there's a big feeling element to that, because, you know, I work a lot with when I work with men, I get them into their bodies because they spend so much time in their heads and they don't feel very much, and they overthink a lot. And I find when we drop out of the overthinking, they can feel when they're able to be more social. But it takes a lot to be in the moment and be like, oh, I could make this joke about, I don't know, the fact that behind me on the floor there's some weird picture that has some masking tape on it. And to know that, oh, that's an appropriate joke to make in this moment with this person. Yeah. And I've read the room right, you know, and I feel like I did read something about this and why this is actually important for child rearing, the social intelligence element. But I can't think where I read this not too long ago, maybe. Yeah,
no, but it is, you know, you have to be able to read your child, and particularly tiny babies, because they can't communicate. It's a lot about recognizing their emotional state, recognizing what they need. And, you know, if you have high emotional intelligence, which is reflected in sense of humor, then, you know, you are going to be better at that, at actually empathizing and understanding what this child actually needs. And it's a really important skill for parenthood, basically.
Yeah. Okay. And then, since we're on the topic of online dating, and I've heard you speak about a little bit already. So then we've got this thing, right? This online dating that's like taken the world by storm, so unfortunately. And it completely cuts off our natural way of connecting and falling in love. And, you know, we should all just get off dating apps, really, or just use them as introductory services. I think that's what you said, actually, when we were on the panel. We should just use them as introductory services.
They're not actually a dating tool. They're an introduction tool.
Yeah. But they've also hijacked our addictive and obsessive nature as well in the way that they're built, dating apps.
Yeah, they have. Because we get a dopamine hit from, you know, if we get a match, basically you get a dopamine hit. You know, any social media, if you get a like, you get a hit. And also they feed into our wish to be liked and our wish to be members of a group and, you know, to be seen to be attractive. And therefore, and they, you know, they sort of are there to, give that reassurance. Obviously, quite a lot of the time it's rejection, but you're hunting for that reassurance that I'm a nice person, I'm a good person, I can be a member of this group, I can, and that's what they feed into, that insecurity that all humans have about membership of a group or being liked. And unfortunately, that's what they feed into. And that's why people will, check them so often, because it becomes addictive. Because when you do get a like or a match, that hit is lovely. It's really nice. And dopamine is addictive. So you are constantly searching for that by constantly checking. And I know, there are people on dating apps, mostly men, I'm afraid, who don't actually ever contact the person that they've matched with, but they just collect matches. That's all they do. It's like it's either something for their own self-esteem or something they do competitively with somebody else. They're called collectors, and that's what they do. They actually don't ever contact anyone, which is a bit weird, but there we are.
Have you done many studies around these people that just kind of collect matches? And
we've never done a study around them. We know that's the case because of data we've been given by various dating apps, that these people they can see that they get these matches, that they never ever contact anybody. And anecdotally, we've been told that there are people out there who do. They competitively do it with their mates. So, today I got 12 matches. How many did you get? And it seems very odd, but I think in a way it might be a way of building self-esteem. Yes, maybe they're massively avoidant and actually don't ever want to take it a step further. But it seems like a slightly weird behaviour to do.
Yeah, and I'm thinking actually that I've actually come across men who do the collecting. And when I think about it now, I've come across a couple. I've coached one or two, and it is exactly that. Is that it's a boost of self-esteem. And then the intense fear of failure. So they don't take any action because they want to avoid the ones that I've spoken to, but I can think of like 3 or 4, the intense experience of failure. So it allows them to stay in a kind of fairy tale land of like, oh, well, this person was really attracted to me. This could have been something really amazing. But I chose not to take any action instead of having to step into that circle or space of, oh, now I need to actually be funny, humorous, interesting, socially aware, and so forth. And I may miserably fail at that and have to deal with the emotions of that miserable failure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably correct. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How does, you touched on it a bit, but you touched on self-esteem there. And I see self-esteem as such a common thread in my work with people. How does self-esteem affect our love, and in particular, I guess, our romantic love and the attraction stage of love as well?
Obviously, it does. I mean, there's various things where self-esteem comes into it. I mean, you do have to value yourself to think that someone else is going to value you. And I think it's very hard if you have very low self-esteem to believe that anyone would be attracted to you. And I think that's a real hindrance. So we know that people with very low self-esteem do find dating and relationships very, very difficult. The other thing with self-esteem is, particularly if it comes hand in hand with quite a high level of anxiety or stress, stress produces cortisol. And cortisol, unfortunately, has a very negative effect on all the bonding hormones. So if you have cortisol in your brain, you either won't get a release of dopamine and oxytocin and beta endorphin, or it will be masked by the effects of it will be masked. So again, if people are very, very stressed about the situation of dating, unfortunately, that means those helpful chemicals aren't going to help as much as they could, essentially. The other thing I will also say about self-esteem is what happens if yours is, I don't think you can have too high self-esteem, but I think you can have, how would I put this? Too high ideas about your value in the dating world. So actually there is such a thing as mate value in the dating world. And we calculate, it's based upon the likelihood that you will be reproductively successful. And so mate value, it's mainly indicated through bodily indicators. And for men and women, it's different how we calculate mate value because they bring different things to the table when it comes to parenting. And even if you don't want kids, the whole idea of the whole evolution of dating behavior is that you're going to have a kid with this person. And so that's how it's evolved. And so men and women, we calculate it in different ways. But what we found out with mate value is in long-term relationships that are successful, partners end up, a person will end up with someone of similar mate value to themselves. It's called assortative mating. It's something humans do. So if you're like of medium mate value, a successful relationship would be with someone else who's medium mate value. High value, go with high value, low value, go with low value. What we tend to find is if you overvalue yourself, and you tend to end up with people who are actually much more valuable than you in the mating game, those tend to not be very stable or successful relationships. And quite often when men say to me, it's particularly men, I'm afraid, when men say to me, I'm not successful, I never go on dates. One of the reasons could be that they're overvaluing their worth. And I'm afraid classic punching above your weight. So you are... I can think of one guy who I worked with who was lovely in many ways, probably high medium value, but not uber up here. He would only date someone who basically looked like a supermodel. And you're like, mate, you're not going to get a supermodel. And then really lovely people who are very attractive, of similar, he would ignore. And because he had assessed his value or what he would find acceptable in this space where he just wasn't going to find anyone for a stable relationship. He might get someone for a short-term relationship. These mismatches tend to be okay in short-term relationships, but long-term relationships, and we've studied many for many, many years, you will find that the mate value is pretty much the same. So sometimes I would say it's not too much self-esteem. It's just not quite understanding your own value within the dating arena. And I'm afraid the dating market is a stock market. That's what it is at the end of the day.
Wow. It's the stock market dating. That's going to be a wonderful
It is. You all have value, I'm afraid. Yeah. You're all
and can
worth
we individually work out our value?
It's quite hard. I mean, it's not actually sort of a set figure. But yes, so men and women bring different things. And it doesn't matter actually what your sexuality is. You still bring the same things. So for women, what a woman will bring to the table in evolutionary terms is her health and her ability to have a child, because that's all evolution wants you to do. So the indicators for women tend to be quite focused on body shape. I'm not talking about dress size, weight, anything like that. I'm talking about body shape. And they are for indicators that show, A, that she is fertile. So these will be indicators that show, for example, high circulating estrogen, low circulating testosterone. Higher testosterone shows you're closer to menopause, so you're not as fertile. Also, various things to do with the body shape are good indicators of health, like things like diabetes, heart disease, that kind of thing. So generally, women's indicators are things to do with health and fertility, and men, because I'm afraid sperm isn't very valuable. I'm afraid not very valuable in the game of things. What you bring to the table is you bring provision and protection and commitment to that particular individual. Provision and protection are slightly harder to assess in terms of indicators. So some of them are body related to show athleticism, strength, levels of circulating testosterone. Some of them are more to do with provisioning, is more to do with, your job, that kind of thing. And so when we try and work out where people sit in terms of mate value, we are looking at things that those indicators that show those things. And we're also looking for evidence of things like commitment, to see whether or not this person is actually committed to this relationship. That's in a long-term relationship. Your mate value in a short-term relationship is calculated slightly differently. And at that point, your genes become much more important. So genes are less important in a long-term relationship because there's all these other things that you have to bring to the table as well. Particularly for women, if all you're getting out of a relationship, a short-term relationship, is basically sex. If you become pregnant, the only thing you're going to get from that guy is his genes. You're not going to get provisional protection. So at that point, your genes become much more important. And that's when we look at things like facial attractiveness, because facial attractiveness is a good indicator of very strong genes that you want your baby to have. So it's kind of complicated. It depends on what kind of relationship we're looking at, but you can roughly place somebody into either a low, a medium, or a high level of mate value, essentially.
Wow. I just had these voices of these red pill guys just like screaming in my ear now, going, we were right.
I do want to say about what I will say about the story of human mating, and what I always say when I give my public talks is it's incredibly non-feminist, I'm afraid. It's a story still of, big strong men protecting and provisioning, and weak women, lying there having babies and being tied to this kitchen sink. I'm afraid there's two reasons for that. The first is evolution's really slow. And feminism has only really been around for, maximum 70 years. And that doesn't even register on the evolutionary timeline. If you imagine that this particular way of mate choice, which is what we call it, is 500,000 years old. So not really indicating. We know we need it to be around for a good few tens of thousands of years before it would affect anything. The second thing to say is, unfortunately, feminism hasn't touched the majority of the human species. So there are many women in many environments in the world where they actually really do need a bloke to protect and provision still, because the environment is harsh or because of the cultural rules, they're not allowed to work, and they have to do childcare. And therefore, until all women can protect and provide for themselves, it won't change, essentially. So I know it's a very unfeminist story, and it definitely doesn't say that women can't protect or provision. They certainly can. But our essential initial attraction behaviours are still based on that sort of very old sexual division, essentially.
And then we also then have conscious choice, right, as well.
Exactly.
Or
and that's
values.
when it changes. So all of this indicator stuff to do with bodies is unconscious. And it's something that you assess in the first nanosecond of seeing somebody. So literally those first nanoseconds, it's actually the thing that kicks off the oxytocin and dopamine cascade. So your brain has an amazing algorithm. It will take in all this sensory information about body shape and all that kind of malarkey, and it will do a calculation to work out the person's mate value. And it will then think, well, actually, does this kind of match with my mate value? Yes, it does. Okay, ping. Dopamine and oxytocin start flooding your system and off you go. But then absolutely the conscious brain can override all that. So this person could be, from a mate value point of view, a bit of a disaster. But your conscious brain might see many other things. And also, it's entirely on body shape. This isn't when the person opens their mouth. They can open their mouth and be the most creative, funny, wonderful person. And at that point, your conscious brain will override and go, well, actually, they're brilliant. I really like them. They're really funny. They're really kind. Okay, they don't have the right body shape and they don't, have that much evidence of, being able to protect or give birth to babies or whatever. But actually, they're a really cracking person. And that's why, and I bang on about this quite a lot on social media, do not become obsessed by chemistry. When people say to me, oh, we had a date and there wasn't any chemistry. I really liked them, but there wasn't any chemistry, so we're not doing it again. I just go, well, that was a mistake, because chemistry is just the itsy tiny bit, first bit at the beginning. And actually, there's no particular value to the chemistry. Chemistry does not indicate compatibility in the long term. It just shows you that your sensors took in some information and went, yeah, I quite like them. But your conscious brain wasn't involved. You have no idea if they're compatible with you in any way. And actually, you will only find that out when you've spent time with them, you've talked to them, and you've worked out you've got an indicator of their attachment style, you know what their values are, you know what their ethics are, you know what their sense of humour is like, you know what their personality's like. And at that point is the point when you really decide whether you're attracted to somebody or not. So the tyranny of chemistry is, and I think it is something that's really been driven by social media, where all these people go, you've got to have chemistry. No, you don't, actually. You really, really don't. Actually, the slow burn, in one sense, is a better indicator of whether or not this is a long-term relationship that's going to work.
I love that. Tyranny of chemistry. I think that's another book there, Anna. The Tyranny of Chemistry. People think it's an academic piece, but really it's about the pitfalls of following chemistry in dating. And I'm a big proponent that chemistry is basically bollocks and is pretty useless for us now in this very modern world that we live in.
It is.
Why have we become so, I know you said social media, but I'm going to say something, and this might sound massively inappropriate. I've always felt when people are really obsessed with chemistry, it's this kind of sign of a bit of an immature brain, an immature kind of thinking pattern when you look at the realm of dating, being like, oh, but, I have to feel this tingle in my loins, or it just means that it can't go anywhere. I've never really agreed with that. I've like, yeah, it can be good for short-term things, but when you're looking for someone who you're going to nurture with and create a life with, like, that tingle at the beginning isn't so useful. It can be created through time. Why do you think people become so obsessed with this idea of chemistry? I
think love is really scary. And actually, human love is quite complicated. And because we've got this big conscious brain, it's become even more complicated, because we can't just rely on our instincts. We can't just be like a little tiny mammal mouse and just go, well, hey, brilliant. which is, they don't engage their brains at any point, and they manage to do very well. So I think it's scary. And when things are scary, humans don't like things that aren't predictable. And so they try to make rules, and they try to make rules to make it easier. And I think that's what happens with a lot of people on social media, a lot of people who call themselves dating coaches, that kind of thing. They set rules. They say, these are the rules. So you get these books saying, here are the 10 rules to me, and because that's really what people want. They want an answer. Just go, if you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this, then you'll get a relationship. And that's what they really want to happen. So I think that's why people become obsessed with it, because at least it's an indicator of, should I carry on investing in this date or not? Okay, I could cut my losses. And also I think it's also because particularly some people have so much choice, they think they want to do this efficiently. So if after 20 minutes I don't have chemistry, then I'm not going to waste my time because there's 10 other people over here I could be on a date with who might be the one. So I'm not going to do that. And I think that's the problem. What we've forgotten is there are no rules. Sorry, but there aren't. We're all highly individual. And you can't do this efficiently. Relationships are supposed to be costly. That is the point. They are very valuable. And when something's valuable in evolutionary terms, it costs either in time and or energy. And that means you are supposed to sit there and have several dates. You're supposed to invest in this particular process because as far as evolution is concerned, this is the most important thing you're going to do today. Okay? Because that's just the point. And I think we've forgotten that actually it's supposed to take time and it's supposed to take your time and it's supposed to involve your brain thinking. And I think we just think because we live in a very efficient world where everything has to be done efficiently, you can do this efficiently as well, and you really can't. That's not what it's supposed to be like.
Love and relationships are not efficient entities.
No, they're not. They're not supposed to be. They're supposed to be costly because they're very valuable. And therefore, if something's valuable, you invest in it. If you've got a valuable commodity, you invest in it, don't you? And that's what a relationship is. It's a valuable commodity. And therefore, you give it time and you give it brain power.
Yeah, I love that. So people, chemistry, as I said before, it's fucking useless. I did a podcast episode with someone called, a therapist called Adi Jolie, and we really got into that because we both felt very strongly about how people have been led astray by chemistry. And I guess it leads into one of the things I wanted to actually ask about, toxic relationships. I feel like it's this thing, God, I feel like everyone's calling other people narcissists. It just constantly comes up in the world. And I'm always so blown away how bold people are to call other people narcissists, but they have no training. They've just decided because, they read something on Instagram that now they can call their ex-partner narcissist and they fall in love with narcissism. Everyone's obsessed with narcissists. But toxic relationships are always a bit confusing to me because I guess from my personal experiences, I kind of experience a toxic relationship and I'm like, oh, this isn't nice. I don't like this. I'm going to leave. But a lot of people find themselves in cycles of toxic relationships that are harmful to them, abusive to them, whether that mentally, emotionally, or sexually. What's the mechanism for us as human beings that and I imagine that, our friend beta endorphins has something to do with this. What's the mechanism of us being attracted to toxic relationships and staying in them?
Okay, it's very complicated. So ultimately, love is actually about control. So love evolved to control us as a species to make sure we reproduce. That's what it. So it's like a really benign control, but that's what it is. And because it's so important to us, we have evolved to absolutely viscerally need it. So if we don't have it, our mental health goes down, our physical health goes down, you feel this immense hollowness, this immense loneliness, which you are supposed to feel by going to find a relationship. And because of that, unfortunately, because we have this absolute visceral need for love, it can be used to manipulate you. And what separates us from the animals, because other animals do experience love, is that we are the only species that uses it to manipulate people. No other animal uses love to manipulate. And that's the benign end of control, really, saying things like, if you loved me, you make me a cup of tea kind of thing. But unfortunately, because we viscerally need it, it can be used to coerce and abuse and manipulate. The reason why some people are open to toxic relationships is very complicated. sometimes we learn a lot about our relationship models from who brought us up. And also who brought us up, particularly in the first 2 years of our life, has a fundamental impact on the architecture of your actual brain. So human babies are born very underdeveloped. Most of their brain development occurs after birth. And that means the environment in which they are born is very, very, is a major influence on that brain structure, much more than their genetics. And the bit that's really growing is the prefrontal cortex, which is where your social relationship cognition is. So children who are brought up in, with good models of relationships, nurturing, appropriate eye gaze, touch, not too intrusive, sensitive parenting, secure attachment, blah, 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 blah. That architecture grows really well. Really well. Lots of lovely, lovely connections, lots of dense grey and white matter, beautiful levels of oxytocin and dopamine and beta endorphin, lots of receptors, very low cortisol, a nice quiet amygdala. Bob's your uncle. You've got a really good structure. If you are brought up, unfortunately, in an environment where you are neglected or abused, or you are not given that nurturing love that you need, particularly in those first 2 years, the brain architecture doesn't work properly. It's not built properly. We actually see something called neuronal death, and you can see it in the brain. There's not enough density of grey and white matter in that area. You tend to have very low levels of things like oxytocin, dopamine, beta endorphin. You have very high levels of cortisol, which block all those anyway. And your amygdala tends to be enlarged. And what that means is it's overactive all the time. It's looking for fear and risk in your environment because you have been brought up in an environment which is very dangerous. All of those things count against you being any good at relationships, essentially. It makes it very, very hard, which is why children who are brought up, unfortunately, in abusive households tend to go on either to not be able to have relationships or unfortunately repeat the abuse in their relationships. And it's really horrible and it's very, very sad. And so that's why we tend to see people who might abuse. It's partly because they have not been given any of the tools to be any good at this. And if their example of a relationship was my mum hit my dad or my dad hit my mum, that's how you do relationships. You do relationships by being abusive and being violent and forcing people to do things. And so that's why we see this go over generations. It's quite a hard cycle to break. And the reason people stay is really hard. And I've done work with survivors, both men and women. And there are lots of reasons why people stay. We don't know yet whether there's any neurochemical reason why people stay, partly because it's a very vulnerable population and ethically it's quite hard to do those tests on them. But, talking to them, first of all, a lot of them genuinely believe they are in a loving relationship. Okay? Either because the relationships they grew up with, that was how love was expressed, or because they have this belief that, and particularly abusers tend to oscillate between being very abusive and being unbelievably caring. It's sort of a gaslighting thing. And so they cling on to the bit where it's nice and that the person loves them and the person does really love them. And also they will think quite powerfully, for example, I love them and I can change them. If I just love them enough, they will change. They will become different. Quite often also it's the love of someone's children that makes them stay. So particularly men will tend to stay with an abusive female partner because they fear that if they leave, the children will stay with the mother because that's the way our courts work, I'm afraid, and that the children will then be at risk. So it's actually the love of their children that prevents them leaving. So toxic relationships are a real thing. And I'm about to give a talk on it actually in a couple of weeks in Bristol. And it comes down really to our absolute visceral need for love, which makes us seek it out and means that we can be quite strongly manipulated. Obviously, some people who are abusers have personality traits that make them abusers. So there's a thing called the dark triad. People who have the dark triad personalities, which are Machiavellian. So, very, very emotionally intelligent, but uses it to manipulate other people, manipulative and also narcissistic, true narcissists, not narcissists who have been called that on social media. People who carry those three personality traits are much more likely to be abusers, unfortunately, because that's the way the cookie crumbles for them. That's how they deal with people, is they have high emotional intelligence, but absolutely no empathy and no conscience about how they treat people. So toxic relationships, abusive relationships are very, very complicated to unwrap. But I think it does stem a lot from our absolute deep need for love and also from the fact that how we are brought up is so influential. I mean, we as a body of researchers and people who deal in child development, we cannot stress enough how important the first 2 years of a child's life are in terms of brain development. It's absolutely critical.
And I really listen to that as someone whose child will come into the world in the next few months, maybe even, the time that other human beings are listening to this episode, and my baby will be born.
Yeah.
So I really those 2 years
So
are
exciting.
exciting. And also that weight of those 2 years, are so important.
But what I will say, and this is from my other work, as parents, you are instinctively good at this. So you can read lots of baby manuals and they're fine. Excellent. Very good at telling you what to do with nappies and stuff. But actually, we are biologically primed to be really good at this. And men as well. I'm afraid to tell you, your testosterone is about to drop through the floor. When your baby's born, it will drop by about a third and it won't recover. That's it. But the reason why it happens is because testosterone blocks dopamine and oxytocin for a start. So it will free up those chemicals to enable you to bond. And also men with lower testosterone anyway are much more empathetic and much more motivated to care for children. So it's a really important change. But what I always say to all new parents is you are instinctively good at this. If you just tune into your baby, forget all the books, forget all the advice, tune into your baby, listen to your baby. What does your baby need? And if you can just be in that zone with the baby and really get into that lovely synchrony, give and take of reciprocity, of eye gaze, of touch, once the baby starts babbling backwards and forwards, you'll be fine. You will be fine. Humans are evolved to be good at this. Even though human babies are, quite complicated little beings, we are, as long as you focus on being sensitive and really listening to what your baby needs, you will be absolutely fine.
Yeah. And we're going to come back to the fatherhood and baby stuff in a moment. But there's just one more question about love, because I think this is something we touched on in the panel, and I think it was really interesting. We had to say, we talked about the future of love, and particularly the world we're moving into instead of technology around things like, AI, machine learning, virtual reality. And you talked about... I remember you talked about putting people into brain scans. And I had this image in my head is like these people with this little conveyor belt that goes in and you're scanning their brain and you're sitting in a little office above making evil villain sounds. And you said that the way our brains react to the kind of AI love is very different to how we react to human love.
Yeah. So there's lots of debate about, at the moment in AI in relation to relationships, and the idea of what we call social robots. So like your classic humanoid looking robot, and the idea that we could have relationships with them going forward. And particularly it's a big thing now because we have a care crisis, and the idea is you'd replace human carers with robot carers, and they would build these wonderful relationships, caring relationships with these old people or children or whoever they're looking after. Absolutely terrifying. That's probably another podcast entirely. But problem we have is that when you put somebody in a scanner and they interact with a human, this bit of the brain goes mad. Recognizes you're a sentient human. Hi, let's get together. Our brains are going to become one. We're going to have this wonderful time. Put them in a brain scanner and show them with their dog. Same thing happens. Oh, it's a dog. Yay, it's sentient. Lovely, lovely. Put them in and show them either a computer or an AI robot. Nothing. There's literally nothing going on. It's not recognized as something that you could have a relationship with. And that is a fundamental problem, because unless you recognize that it's somebody you can have, you don't get any of the neurochemistry, which is what underpins all this good mental and physical health. You get none of the really close bonds that you get. You don't get attachment. You don't get empathy. You don't get trust. You don't get any of those sorts of behaviors. So at the moment, it's really hard to know how the hell that's supposed to work, because caring isn't just about going to someone's house and giving them some tablets and making them a cup of tea. Caring is a really complex human behavior, and it's about understanding what somebody needs. So you need empathy for that. You need to be able to look at them and go, okay, today you are fed up. Why might you be fed up? Okay, I remember that last week this happened. Okay, I've got my own life experience. I know when that happens to me, I feel like this. So I am going to then empathize with you, and I'm going to help you through this using my own life experience and my understanding of what you are going through. And that is what caring is. It's sitting on the sofa, holding somebody's hand and saying, okay, let's go through this together. And robots, until they solve that problem, won't be able to do that. And that's actually very detrimental to the person you're caring for. Because if at the moment, to release all that lovely neurochemistry which underpins all our longevity and good health, etc., you need a wet brain. You need another brain to do that, because brains talk to each other. It's really amazing, they do. And even your dog's brain will talk to your brain. Robots don't have brains, and that's the fundamental problem with it. And so I know roboticists will be like, oh, you know, but it's not about just creating something that can have a pre-programmed conversation, which is where, you know, we're at the moment. It's depressing. It's absolutely fundamental that people still have sentient beings in their lives. And I absolutely, at the moment, can't work out how you would program AI to be sentient. I really don't.
Yeah. What if someone thinks that they're talking to a real person, but they're actually talking to AI? Do they know? Does their brain know that they're being fooled?
Quite often people can spot it. And it's not anything particularly overt. We're very good at, so let's say it was a chat. We're very good at telling from the way someone talks whether or not they're human. And it's nothing, there are people trying to work this out now. One of the things it is that humans make mistakes. Okay, they make errors. AI, probably because it's made by computer scientists, don't make mistakes. They're programmed to be perfect. Okay, so one of the problems is we can tell because the thing never makes errors at all. But there's lots of research going on about why are we able to detect that? Yeah, exactly. What we're reading, what we're talking to, isn't human. There's just something that we're very good at picking up on. That it's not a fellow human. Essentially.
Got it. Yeah. Because we think about AI and love. Because I'm thinking, what I guess I'm thinking of is like, there's so many. We talked about loneliness briefly before. So many people who are lonely. Will those people be who are lonely or fearful of love? Are those people going to be seduced into this? Let's call it AI love, AI or robot love, because it's safer than real love, and they don't have to experience any pain or difficulty.
Yeah,
but it's maybe closer than what they've ever experienced.
Yeah, we know that, and we know that the closest we have to that is sex robots, which are being developed. And okay, that's not quite the same as love. It's a different thing. But we know that people who do struggle with relationships, do struggle with loneliness, are drawn towards that. We know, that there are now holograms and things you can get. We can have a holographic girlfriend or holographic boyfriend. And we know that some people are drawn to that because, yes, they're very fearful of real relationships. And to be honest, if that does that for you, I suppose, okay. What worries me is, again, you're not getting any of the benefit of actually a relationship, really. So that's the problem, is in the long term, you might still suffer. And also I would say to people, if you are scared of romantic relationships, go and find love somewhere else. Okay, yeah, get your sex robot or your holographic girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever, but make sure you've got love from somewhere else, whether that be with platonic, with your friends, with your family, with your community, with your dog, with your God, whatever it might be. Just make sure it's there, because that will buffer you. That will buffer you from the fact that you've decided to have what we'd call a romantic or reproductive relationship with something artificial. I don't want to poo-poo all this in that sense, because some people are very lonely and think that this will help them, and it might help them in some ways, but because the fundamental neurochemistry isn't there, it's troubling. It's troubling because they won't get the mental or physical health benefits from it.
But they won't realize that. That it's almost like, it sounds like, and I'm making a big assumption here, and I don't know anything about this topic, nowhere near as much as yourself, is that they'll be seduced into the idea of it, the kind of conscious idea of like, I can have this lovely robot and I can fall in love, and they'll feel a level of kind of contentment. But over a period of time, they won't get any of the kind of, there will be also an underlying maybe emptiness or loneliness that's there that maybe can be masked by the fact that I have something to touch and hold.
What we tend to find with people is there is a period of novelty where they report an increase in mental health, good mental health, because it's kind of like a novelty thing, and they will, for a period of time, get dopamine from it. But dopamine, as we all know, is just a reward chemical and it's on its own. It's not actually a love-inducing chemical unless you've got oxytocin and all the other ones with it. So I think it's once that kind of novelty wears off, and once, as you say, the lack of human touch and the lack of human eye gaze and the lack of the joining of human brains, that's when it starts to get troubling. And that's when that hollowness or that loneliness will probably come back, because we are just evolved to, it's like there was a brilliant study showing people being touched by the person they loved in a scanner, touched by somebody they didn't know in a scanner, and then touched by something that was really lovely and soft but wasn't human. And the only one where they got, really positive benefits from it was being touched by the person they loved. We can sense this. We can sense when we're being touched by a human. We can sense when we're being touched by a human we love. And it's it's within us. It's innate, basically.
Wow, powerful. I wanted to finish up as I said, for not purely selfish reasons, but also partly, is fatherhood. Because yes. I remember when we spoke on the panel, you said there's something else that you really got into, and I know you've written a book about fatherhood as well. And I've got this sense through my life of that we kind of see fatherhood as this kind of second-class citizen. And even going through this journey of having a baby and being part of the, interacting with the NHS and different parts of it, I've even noticed that this continual process of that, I don't really matter how I'm feeling.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And how I'm being is just actually, really, at no point in the last 8 months has any health professional said to me, how are you feeling about this?
Yeah.
There's been like a question to the two of us, or, my partner also has been taken to one side and been questions about her mental health, been offered a therapist and all sorts. But at no point has anyone really asked me that question, apart from when we did the antenatal classes where she, really stopped.
Yes.
But that's just me, feeling left out. But how important is the father? You talked about the first 2 years, but how important is a father in the way of not so much as raising a good child, because that's too vague, but like creating that healthy chemical balance and mind for a child in their first few years?
It's critical. It's absolutely critical. I have to explain from the very first point why human fathers are important. Human fathers are really rare. So only 5% of mammals have investing fathers, which is fathers who stick around, care, feed, do all that kind of stuff. Very few primates, of which we are one, have it, and we are the only ape. Now, for something as very rare as that to evolve, it was a really complex thing to evolve. It had to be really important to our survival, and in particular the survival of the child. So first of all, we can say from evolutionary theory point 1, fathers are critical. And then we have all the evidence to support that. So we have the evidence that fathers build an attachment to their child, which is just as powerful as mums and just as critical as mums, but actually different. And that difference is really, really important. So we need a dad to help us raise these children. But what evolution doesn't do is create two people with exactly the same roles, because there's no point. There's no point you being a male mum. What's the point of that? We've got a mum over here. We don't need one of those. We need a dad. And so dads do things very differently. And so their attachment is very different. And that fits really nicely into the attachment that the mum builds. So the child gets the full developmental environment. Secondly, they actually... When I started doing this 15 years ago, the argument was that dads had no role in child development at all. Okay? Wow. Mum was the one who had the role, and dad was kind of there on the periphery, being a bit useless. What we now know is not only do they have a role equal to mum, but actually they have a unique role which mum cannot do. Okay? Wow. So they are absolutely critical. And that role is really important in the human species, because your role, and we've studied it in many cultures around the world, so it's not just a Western thing, is to help your child enter the world beyond the family. And what we mean by that is what mums tend to do is they're very, very nurturing, but they're quite inward looking. They kind of clutch the baby to them and they're like, okay, I'm going to look after you and I'm going to nurture you and you're going to stay here. And they tend to do that. And it's what their attachment is characterized as. What dads do, they do nurturing, brilliant at nurturing, but they also have an added element of what we call challenge. And dads are there to push their children a little bit, to actually turn them round and face them to the world and say, right, this is the world. And one day you're going to be in it without us, and you are going to have to survive and thrive. So I am going to be the parent that helps you do that. And that is why, for example, things like rough and tumble play are so important with children. So you talk about playful dads. Playing is the most important thing a dad can do with a child. So rough and tumble play starts about 6 months with babies, giggling, tickling, wrestling, all that sort of thing. When you get older with a toddler, it's chasing, it's throwing in the air, it's all those sorts of things. So important because it challenges the child physically and mentally. It helps build resilience. It helps them assess risk because it can be quite dangerous. It helps them understand social relationships because it's about being reciprocal and making sure the other person is still enjoying it, but so being empathetic. It's a really important developmental tool. And that's what dads do all over the world. Doesn't matter where you're from, what culture you're from, that's your job. And we live in a really complicated social and technological world. And it's really important that dads are there to do that job. I want to say, just to make really clear to people who are listening to this, it doesn't have to be the biological dad. It just has to be a dad. And so we always say dads are not defined by either role in conception or any genetic relatedness at all. It's whoever steps up and does the job. So in other cultures, actually, the biological dad isn't that important. And actually, quite often you have a thing called a social father who could be an uncle, a grandfather, an elder brother, something like that. In some cultures, actually, kids have whole teams of fathers and each one does something different. But dads are really, really important. They are not secondary. They shouldn't be secondary. They are true co-parents. So we kind of need to shift mum on the pedestal a little bit and put dad next to her, because they are really, really important. It's really sad that the story we still hear from fathers is that they feel like they're pushed to particularly in the NHS, unfortunately, that they are pushed to the periphery of importance. They're never asked how they are. They're never asked whether they have any questions. They're never asked whether they have any concerns. Their mental health is not looked at, even though men can get postnatal depression at a rate of 1 in 10. And it's just a cultural issue. It's entirely a cultural issue. We have this belief system, which, I mean, I do a talk called The Myth-Busting Power of Dad Science, because we can bust every single myth that there is about fathers with science. We can show you that they are as instinctive at parenting as mum is. They go through exactly the same brain changes. They have exactly the same sort of hormonal changes, which prepare them to be good at this. So there's actually no difference. But we just have a culture where we've decided that dads are secondary, that they're a bit useless, that they are surplus to requirements, and we don't really need them around. And that parenting is a mum's domain. And it just isn't. It just really isn't. And it's a huge sadness that I've been banging on about it for 15 years, and there's now a really big group of us, and we are still struggling to get that question through. I must say your generation, the generation who's having babies now, I think are getting more knowledgeable and more empowered about it than previous generations, certainly, I think, which is good. Because actually the change will only come when men stand up and say, I want my role to be recognised and I want to be treated as a co-parent in the whole journey. Because it's not generally one person having a baby. Generally, 2 people have a baby. 2 people become a parent in the birthing room. 2 people go on that journey together. And actually, quite often, mothers will say that. They will say, we chose to become pregnant together. We went to antenatal classes together. This was supposed to be a journey for both of us. But the trouble is the NHS view it very much as the patient. So the mum is the patient and the baby is the patient. And they can't seem to step outside that and see any other way of doing it. And it's really sad. But we will carry on pushing. And I think it is about dads themselves standing up and going, I want to be recognised.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah, really powerful there, what you said. There's something one of my old mentors said to me. And he would say, your mother will teach you that you have a heart, right? And your dad is there, your father is there to teach you how to put your heart out into the world. And as you were talking about
that's lovely. Yeah, that's absolutely right. That is what fathers all over the world do.
Yeah. And it is, and I'm seeing in the men that I know, some a little bit older, some a little bit younger, just through, I think, partly because of the critique and the questioning and the analysis of masculinity that's gone on in our generation has meant that we've questioned a lot of the ways in which we've told that men should be, and particularly this kind of nurturing. And also because of the impact our lack of father, or the way our fathers showed up in our lives, has led us to look to change and look to do something about it, has really shifted how a lot of men have decided to father. Instead of being like, oh, well, the way my dad did it was fine and I'll just do the same thing. There's a lot of being like, well, actually, I can change this. I don't have to do this thing in the way that he did. And I can read some books, I can go to some courses, I can talk to my friends, and it's become more socially acceptable for men to be more involved in the fathering of their children than definitely in past generations.
Yeah, and that's what's been wonderful over the last, few years, is that is dads are now proud to stand up and go, yes, I am a father. And actually what this generation is starting to do is actually also standing up and going, and that is the most important thing in my life. That role is the most important thing, and that's what's lovely. And I think that's what will drive the change. Is ultimately it will just have to be, dad power basically that pushes it through and makes people like the NHS change and makes people like the government change in terms of their attitude with things like paternity leave and that kind of thing. It will be the power of the dads themselves wanting it.
Yeah. And also, it's great that will have an impact. That will have an impact on. It will take longer to have an impact on the way society sees men and fathers, because it kind of always lags behind. But it'll have a very powerful effect on how we view men's usefulness outside of provisioning, for instance.
Absolutely, and these arguments about toxic masculinity. I hate that term anyway, because it's just completely inappropriate. It suggests, particularly to young men, that all men are toxic, which is bizarre. This is a massive. The reason why I actually got into it was when I started, a lot of research on dads was negative. It was about absent dads and the impact they had on their children. There was no research on actually the vast majority of men who, even if they get divorced, actually stay in their children's lives and do a good job. And actually most dads do a good job. There are some not good dads in the way there are not good mums, actually. And that's who I wanted to highlight, the men who actually were doing a bloody good job, actually. And that's what we've got to remember. There's this whole angle of men, which is nurturing and caring and supportive and ambitious for their children and, the centre of their family and all this sort of thing. And I think we forget that. And in all those discussions about toxic masculinity, no one ever talks about the huge part of being a man, which is being a father. And that troubles me.
Yeah. And this is probably a conversation for another time. I've often said that it's always, in the years that I've grown up, especially in the last 10 years, if you want to berate and bash men, go ahead. No one's going to stop you. No one's going to criticize you for it. You can say whatever you want. The world will just listen and nod. But if you want to say anything about women, then someone will stop you. Someone will stop you until until you're sexist in some way. And if you want to praise men,
that's what I give.
Someone may berate you as well.
Yeah. No. I mean, I get backlash from a particular sector of, unfortunately, usually the feminist. I am a feminist, but I'm a particular sort of feminist. There's some quite extreme feminists who have criticised me for the work I do, in the fact that I champion men and I champion fathers, and I want them to be recognised and supported. And that's a real pity, because what I don't understand is why there's a limit on empathy. So all the mums have to get the empathy and we don't have anything left for the dads. It's like, there's not a limit on empathy. It's not finite. We can open that. It's not like by saying, acknowledging dads, we're taking away being a mum. We're not. What we're saying is kids actually need both of those roles, wherever those roles come from. And so actually we can empathise with everybody, can't we? Why can't we do that? Why can't we just support everyone? It's not a zero-sum game where you take some focus off mum and have to give it to dad. That's not how it works.
Yeah. Equality, ultimately. And I know the time's run away, and I feel like I could ask you questions till the cows come home, as they say. But I think it's a good point to wrap up there. This has been such a wonderful conversation for me. I have taken so much, and I imagine the listeners have taken in so much that can change their dating lives, their relationships, and how they show up as fathers and parents. Where can the listeners learn more about you, find your books, and find your wonderful talks that you're often giving around the world?
Yeah, sure. Well, my two books, one's called Why We Love, the definitive guide to our most fundamental need. And that's obviously about love. And then The Life of Dad, which is my book about fathers. Lots of information on annamachin.com. And I'm also on Twitter and Instagram under Dr. Anna Machin. So you can find me there. And there's lots of information. And all my talks are advertised on my website.
Fantastic. The last thing to say is, listeners, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'm sure you've taken a lot away from this episode. And feel free to share this with someone who you think you could benefit, whether that's a father, whether that's someone who is struggling in love or wanting to thrive in love as well. But all I'll say is a big thank you to Anna, and until next week, ciao, ciao. I want to say a big thank you for listening. It's people like yourself that really help get the podcast out into the world, especially if you're often sharing the episodes and the podcast with people that you feel just could do with listening, right? Can see a different way of being a man, maybe a different way of having dating lives and intimacy and relationships. So I want to say a big thank you. And if maybe after listening to this episode, you think, oh, there's someone actually who could really do with this, please share it with them, share the love. I'm really, really grateful. And if, you want to get in contact with me for any questions, or you want to talk about coaching or any working together, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at @theauthenticman_, or you can email me hello@theauthenticman.net. Thank you very much.